I was 9 years old, I had an obsession. But unlike other 9-year-olds back then, my obsession wasn't with rainbow loom or silly bands. Mine was with journaling. I would drag my mom to Barnes & Noble's at least once every 2 weeks and force her to wait in the car for 45 minutes while I picked out the perfect new notebook. A notebook that I would write in for a couple of days, eventually get bored of, get rid of, and then beg my mom to take me to the store and buy me another one. And then I reached the 5th grade, and thankfully for the environment and my mom's bank account, decided that I wanted to commit to writing in just one notebook. And so my obsession with journaling began. Ever since I could remember, I've always relied upon the idea of self-definition. I've needed a category to know how others perceived me. I've needed structure, a perfect little box that I could place myself and others in. So when I started feeling like I didn't know which box I belonged in anymore, everything seemed to fall apart. And it all started because of my innate need to please other people. If there's anything I've noticed about growing up in Irvine or living in the environment that I did, it's that Irvine culture breeds people pleasers. And I can admit that I wasn't any different. In fact, I was the epitome of a people pleaser. To have someone tell me they're proud of me, to have someone like me or trust me, it gave me reassurance that I wasn't doing anything wrong, that I was on the right path. But I would constantly allow fear of those things not happening drive me further and further away from true happiness or embracing my true self. I would get anything lower than an A and break down over bad grades in fear that my parents wouldn't be proud of me anymore. I would refrain from defending myself to friends that I thought were being mean in fear that they wouldn't like me anymore. And I would stay awake at night thinking of all of the things I could have said or done that would lead to other people being driven away from me. To me, my so-called identity started feeling more and more like a combination of the people I wanted to impress. And I began to measure my own value on a scale of how much other people liked or admired me. I began to trust other people's opinion of me over my own. Now, a story that I find myself thinking about when I say all of this is one time, a while ago, that I got into an argument with one of my friends over something I did that was wrong. And in the heat of the moment, my friend called me selfish, and she called me a bad person. Now, looking back, I know she didn't actually mean it because we're still friends to this day, but the problem with not knowing who you are is everything someone says to you affects you tenfold. Because how did I know they were wrong? If I didn't even know myself, why would I think someone else's opinion of me was invalid? And so I remember thinking to myself that day, maybe I am selfish. Maybe I am a bad person. There's this famous philosopher, I don't know if you guys know her or not, but her name is Ariana Grande. And she once said, "I'd love to see me from your point of view." Now, middle school to about halfway through sophomore year me would kill to see myself how others saw me because in my eyes, they had more insight than I did. So the majority of these years were spent with this disconnect. I was divided between who I was to different people in my life, and all of these different versions of myself became so overwhelming that I came to the realization that perfect little structure I had built for myself when I was younger was slowly starting to completely fall apart. When I restricted myself at a young age and told myself that I needed to fit into a box, that I needed to know exactly who I was, developing a need to make other people happy was the worst possible thing that could have happened because it caused me to lose sense of my true self. I can't remember the amount of times that I thought to myself, if I could just know who I am and be okay with it, maybe I would trust myself before I trusted other people's opinion of me. If I could just know who I am and be okay with it, maybe I would be myself instead of who other people want me to be. If I could just know who I am and be okay with it, maybe I would value my own happiness over the happiness of other people. But regardless of how or what I was feeling, I found it so hard to be vulnerable with the people around me and open up about the problems that I was having. I would purposefully ignore people so that they knew I didn't need to rely on them. I would find it hard to trust anyone enough to tell them that I was going through something, and I thought talking about my feelings, even to my closest friends, would be awkward and a burden to them when they were going through so much already. There were some nights where the pressure of wanting to be enough for the people around me, academically and personally, became so overwhelming that my head would start to hurt. But then things changed. You see, I reread those journals I mentioned in the beginning, the one that had essentially pressured my mom into buying me, and I came to a realization that would change the way I viewed myself forever. I saw my development as a person laid out in front of me on pages of college ruled paper. I saw the worst and best moments of my life, my hardships and my accomplishments pass before my eyes. I read about turning points, the first meaningful friendships I ever made, my sister going through a year full of eye appointments and surgery, my mom getting sick with cancer in the 5th grade, my graduation to the 7th grade, my introduction to the Harry Styles self-titled album, trips to Berkeley with my dad, changing friend groups, developing my first crush, finding my passion in civic engagement, all of these various life events that more or less made me who I am today. Suddenly, my obsession with boxes seemed silly in comparison to all that I had experienced. My structure seemed comparable to a children's playground. My divides seemed pointless and non-existent. Seeing myself transform into a different and better person allowed me to realize that I was so much more than the perceptions that I wanted to place on myself. Identity can't be restrained. No matter how many likable versions of myself I try to create, I can't fit myself into a single box because you can't contain choices. You can't contain decisions. You can't contain relationships. You can't contain all of these various parts of your life that make you who you are. I found clarity through reflection. I saw identity for what it was, and I realized I had overlooked something extremely and embarrassingly obvious when I was younger. Self-definition has the word self in it. It's up to me how I define myself, not other people. And in seeing my progression as a person, I realized that identity was a collection of choices, of actions, of people that I surrounded myself with, of ambitions and dreams. And as I flipped to the last page of my self-written life story, I saw myself as just that, a collection, not a box. For something so obvious to most other people, it was an epiphany to me, something I might even consider another turning point when I look back on it. Here's a bitter truth. I am not okay. I break down under academic stress. I find it hard to rely on anyone. I overthink everything I say to someone. And sometimes I put myself last. But in starting to accept my identity, I'm coming to terms with the fact that being not okay is okay. I don't have to feel the weight of the world on my shoulders in a sorry attempt to pretend that everything is fine to my friends, to my family, or to my peers. There are going to be moments where I do something that doesn't meet my own standard, or I mess up, and that's okay. There are going to be moments where someone doesn't like who I really am, or they have something negative to say about me, and that's okay. There are going to be moments where what I do doesn't necessarily fit into a single box, and that's okay. And there are always going to be moments where I go back to that dark state of feeling like everything I just said is untrue, and that's more than okay. Now, I'm a long way away from believing all of that to be true, but I know the first step is acceptance and admission. I know the first thing I have to do is let people know that I'm struggling, that I'm not always at the place that I should be. And so standing here on this stage and pouring out all of my vulnerabilities to a bunch of strangers, this is my first step. I'd like to start with a quote that I wrote to myself in my 8th grade journal by Sylvia Plath, one that I felt an ironically strong connection to, and one that I feel in this moment. I took a deep breath and listened to the old rag of my heart. I am, I am, I am.